Well, we've started saying these words these days. What words are those? Weapons of mass destruction. You hear people say it. I mean, it's not even alarming to hear it on the news. I mean, we heard it so much during the Gulf War and then during the aftermath of the Gulf War. It's kind of like we've been overexposed to it. It's like everything else in our society. We're so overexposed to stuff, we're deadened to it. Let me talk to you about what weapons of mass destruction mean. We often have no idea how sobering that concept should be. God says at the end of the world, mankind will be capable of destroying all of human life. So He's going to cut this short. God is involved. Yeah, He's sending all these plagues and everything, but wait till you see what man is doing. It's staggering. The fact that mankind will be capable of destroying all of life is exactly what WMD'S mean. We have reached a point 60 years ago where finally mankind possessed in his arsenal something so powerful, so damaging, so big that it was far beyond the scope of anything that earth has experienced prior to that time in the hands of mankind. Consider that when Jesus made this prediction, the armaments of His day were swords and spears and bows and arrows. Okay? There was no possible way that anyone on this planet could have enough swords, bows, arrows, and soldiers and time and food and money and ships to transport them to all the various places to wipe out a quarter, a third, a half of the world's population, and certainly not all of it. There's just no way. There wasn't enough time. I mean, you could hack all day long, and there aren't enough armies, there aren't enough people, and besides that, people could run off and hide and escape in boats and do whatever. It just was impossible. Never could all of human life have been snuffed out. Now think just of one. I'm not going to get into biology and everything, but just think of the easy one, atomic weapons. Tonight, there are tens of thousands of atomic weapons on this planet. Tens of thousands. I mean, we possess the most here. And we sometimes don't even know where they all are. Okay? There's so many. But these are deployed, they're coiled, and they're ready to strike, not just here, but all across the world, these weapons are. Each of these devices would immediately incinerate any human life close enough to be in range of the fearsome destructive power, okay? But if you don't get it at the first, if it's not just the explosion that gets you and that initial burst of radiation, the lingering effects, both in the air and in the ground and in the water, would slowly get you. So I mean, it's just very, very deadly. And slowly or swiftly, lives with lingering or immediate radiation-induced death. In these two verses, Jesus has fast-forwarded us to the end. He's played the tape all the way to the end. And in these verses, he says, this is what is happening. It's far worse than we realize. Tonight we need to see where Christ's words come from. Okay, I want you just to back up, and I want you to see the allusions he's making. So let's go back to Daniel 12, and we'll back up through the Bible, okay? Daniel 12 is where we'll start, and we'll back up toward Isaiah. And Daniel, verse 1 of chapter 12, is exactly, by the way, Daniel is one of the key books. That's why Jesus cites him by name. If you want to know who's important in prophetic literature, in Matthew 24, Jesus says, like Daniel said, and I hope you understand when you're reading what he's saying, because Daniel was the key prophet that laid out the framework for all this. It's not the chart makers and the prophecy book people that made the framework. It's God through Daniel. He made a very clear framework, and we've already covered that the last few verses of chapter 9, saying that this period is going to last 7 years. Tim LaHaye didn't think of that, and neither did Hal Lindsey or any other prophetic buff. It is from the Bible that it's going to be 7 years long. It's punctuated in the middle, and the bad part is the last half. That's all in the Bible. Now look at chapter 12 of Daniel. At that time, And this is picking up on chapter 11. The chapter divisions weren't in the Bible. It was a continuous scroll. And so he's continuing the idea of chapter 11 and the glorious land being invaded and all that's in verse 41 and onward. But at that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. Again, who is this directed toward? The Jewish people. This is Daniel, a prophet of the Jewish people, a Jew himself, speaking of Michael, who, as it were, is the guardian of the Jewish people. He is the one that Satan has a desire to snuff out the Jewish people, because through them came the oracles of God and the promises of God, and through them the prophecies were made by the Jewish prophets, and through them the Messiah was coming, so Satan wanted to get rid of him, and through them the Messiah came, and all the Messiah's promises are connected to those people. And he says, I have attached my name to those people and to this land, and it's my land, and I'm going to end history here. And I'm going to have my people build a temple to me in this land. And when that temple is defiled, and in the midpoint of the tribulation, when this abomination that causes desolation, this man he's a prince of the people who destroyed Jerusalem. That's what Daniel 9 says. The Antichrist is going to be Roman. Isn't that amazing? And I could go into other stuff. You talk about something unnerving, and I'm not into Roman Catholic lore. But did you know in the 12th century there was a Roman Catholic pope that made a prophecy about every pope that would follow him? He described them. And you know what's just eerie? You can see everything he said. I mean, if you look close enough, he said this one would be born at the eclipse, and this one would be born at this and that. And you know, it all has basically happened. But you know what the eerie thing is? He said that from his papacy on, there would only be 112 more popes. And this new guy, Benedict XVI, is the 111th. And you know what this man in the Middle Ages said the last pope would be? Probably was reading Daniel. He said he will be a Roman. And he will end the church. Now, this guy in the 10th, 11th century believed that the last pope, and it could be that he was reading the scriptures, but he prophesied, wrote down in Latin, cryptic little sentences that said the last pope would be Roman. We know for sure the Antichrist is of the people that destroyed Jerusalem, Roman. Doesn't mean a resurrected dead Roman. It means of the ancient Roman Empire's region. And as we saw last time, basically that's Europe. Okay, keep reading to what he says. There will be, he says, this Michael will arise, because this is the crucial time. The Jews are close to being exterminated. He arises. Now listen what verse 1 continues. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. What he's saying is, this is the worst time in history. What did Jesus say in verse 21 of Matthew 24 I just read? There will be great tribulation such as has not been since the beginning of the world to this time. Jesus said this is the greatest, worst time. Why? I thought the flood was. No, the flood wasn't a great tribulation. That was a rapid death of everybody. This is a lingering, long, horrific 3.5 years from the midpoint onward of what I shared with you in January would be like having 3 tsunamis every, 3 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon every day around the world, with hundreds of thousands of people dying every day. That's why it's the greatest. Look what it says in verse 1. It's the greatest time of distress, Daniel 12:1. Nothing like that has happened from the beginning of nations. It's the worst time in history. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Now again, to keep consistency here, it's talking about the remnant of the Israelites. And that they, at that climactic moment when the city is broken through, as we saw last time, and the armies are marching in and they're pillaging and ravaging and raping and murdering, the Lord touches down on the Mount of Olives. And it's going to be a fearful time. Because finally He's going to unleash His wrath. And that's what chapter 19 of Revelation is all about. Well, let's back up, because if the tribulation, the last half, is the worst time in history, what's going on? And let's go back to Isaiah 24. I think it's interesting that Isaiah 24 exactly parallels Matthew 24. Now, I know that's just a coincidence. For this reason, the chapter divisions weren't in the Bible. But I'm glad that the people that divided up the chapters made it so it's easy to remember. Okay, so Isaiah 24, Matthew 24, both are talking about the tribulation. Because Isaiah foresaw something that Jesus affirms. Now, what Isaiah foresaw under the inspiration of God's Spirit, Jesus confirms in this sermon of his. And which in turn, if we read these words in 24 and then back in chapter 13, it should send collective shivers through our hearts as we think about what he's saying. Because a lot of times we get so caught up in kind of the popularized version of this, which is, we just eat this stuff up. You heard Ken Ham say during the seminar that millions of people, all of us, love these prophetic books. We just eat them up, and that's why LaHaye holds so many. But we don't sometimes really know the scriptures that lie behind them. Look, here's one, 24 of Isaiah, verses 1 through 6, okay? Because I want you to think of your neighbors and friends without Christ's love and hope, without his cleansing and forgiveness, what they're going to experience if this kicks off anytime soon. Isaiah 24:1, behold, the Lord lays the earth, and I'm reading from the New American Standard, very similar to New King James. Behold, the Lord lays the earth waste, devastates it, distorts its surface, scatters its inhabitants. Drop down to verse 5. The earth also is polluted by its inhabitants, for they transgressed laws, violated statutes, broke the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse devours the earth, and those who live in it are held guilty. And this is the most critical part. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are burned. Now listen. And few men are left. Now wait. Jesus says, if he doesn't stop this, nobody would be left alive on the planet. He's alluding to what Isaiah is describing, and you can read all of Isaiah 24 and 13 we're going to go to. He says there is such a scorching, a burning, a devastation that few men, humans, mankind are left. Few compared to the vast number. Now, easily, the Bible says half of everybody on this planet are killed in the tribulation. But that's just trying to add together that a third here and a quarter there, and you just get these just huge devastations going on. But God's reckoning is there are few humans left alive. Now, let's back up to chapter 13, verse 9. So we're backing through the Bible. Look at Isaiah 13. And another interesting parallel, if you like similarities, Mark 13 contains the same images as Isaiah 13. And Matthew 24 has the same images as Isaiah 24. So it's just interesting. And again, I don't think that has anything to do with inspiration. It has everything to do with us numbering the different chapters. But look at what it says in verse 9. Behold, and I told you last time, the day of the Lord, that's Old Testament for the end, the second coming, this whole period, this climactic 7 years, punctuated in the middle by the event of Daniel 9, and going through the last half with all these horrific things. Behold, the day of the Lord, verse 9, is coming, cruel, with fury and burning anger. So there's this burning anger to make the land a desolation. Now listen. And he will exterminate. Have you ever exterminated something? Extermination is that is a strong word. God is exterminating its sinners from it. He's exterminating people from this planet. For the stars of the heaven and their constellations will not flash their light. The sun will be dark when it rises. The moon will not shed its light. Doesn't that sound just what we've been reading in chapter 13 and in chapter 24, 13 of Mark, 24 of Matthew, 21 of Luke? Same thing. That something's going to happen. The sun is not going to be as bright. The moon is going to look like blood. It's going to look like the stars are falling from heaven. And Luke says, while all this stuff's happening, people are apsukamai. Interesting Greek word. Only time it's used is in Luke 21. And it means that their breath just goes and they die. They are scared literally to death. Not just burned, not just drowned and poisoned and murdered, but they apsukamai, they pop. Their life goes out of them. It's so scary. This is what he's talking about. But keep reading. Thus, I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will also put an end to the arrogance of the proud and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless. Now look at this. I will make mortal man scarcer than pure gold, and mankind, it's implied, is more scarcer than the gold of Ophir. Chapter 24, there are going to be few people left, God says. Chapter 13, man is going to be scarcer than the best gold. That means it's going to be hard to find a living person. There's going to be so much death, so much destruction. In each of these Old Testament passages, the final judgment of Christ's return is the context. It's what's described. Each describes the very worst time in the history of the planet. But the key point of these two Isaiah prophecies that Jesus alludes to is that the survivors of the tribulation will be few. Few left alive. That's the common denominator. Description of the cause of death in this time period is primarily, in both passages, devouring fire that ravages both the earth and the people, both the land and the inhabitants. This devouring fire, it's in both passages. It both says that people are burned, that people are consumed, that people are dying in this fire.